She walked into my dining room with the confidence of a woman who owned the world, her smile radiant as she complimented my centerpiece. What she didn't know was that in exactly 47 minutes, her own husband would walk through that same door, and that perfect smile would crumble into absolute horror. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of justice. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. My name is Isabella Cortez, and I'm about to tell you the story of how one family dinner became the most satisfying moment of my entire life. But let me start from the beginning, because this isn't just about revenge. It's about the moment when everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, and the people closest to me turned out to be an elaborate lie. I'm 32 years old, a pediatric nurse at Westfield Children's Hospital in Cedar Falls, and until 6 months ago, I believed I was living the American dream. My husband, Marcus Cortez, is, or was, a successful real estate developer who specialized in luxury commercial properties throughout the Riverside County area. We'd been married for 9 years, together for 12, and from the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. I was the steady one, the nurturer, the woman who remembered everyone's birthdays and made sure our lives ran like clockwork. Marcus was the charmer, the ambitious one, the man who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were his best friend. He had these piercing blue eyes that crinkled when he laughed, sandy brown hair that he kept perfectly styled, and a confidence that had drawn me to him since our college days at Northridge University. Our home in the Willowbrook neighborhood was everything we'd dreamed of when we were broke students sharing ramen noodles in our tiny apartment. 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops, a backyard perfect for the children we'd been trying to have for the past 3 years. I'd spent countless hours making it perfect, choosing every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decorative accent with the same meticulous care I brought to everything in my life. I'm what you might call a planner. I keep detailed calendars, color-coded filing systems, and I pride myself on my ability to anticipate problems before they become disasters. It's what makes me good at my job. In pediatric nursing, attention to detail can literally save lives. I notice when a child's breathing pattern changes slightly, when a parent's story doesn't quite add up, when something feels off even if I can't immediately put my finger on what it is. Which is why it's so ironic that I missed the signs of my own husband's betrayal for months, or maybe I didn't miss them. Maybe I saw them and chose to explain them away because the truth was too devastating to accept. The late nights that became later, the business trips that seemed to multiply exponentially, the way he'd started showering the moment he got home, claiming he felt grimy from construction sites and client meetings, the mysterious charges on our credit card for restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in cities where he claimed to be having brief day meetings, the lipstick shade on his collar. That was definitely not mine. I wear subtle pinks and corals. This was a bold crimson that screamed confidence and sexuality. When I asked about it, he laughed and said one of his female clients had hugged him goodbye after signing a major contract. Such a reasonable explanation. Such a perfect lie. The phone calls he'd take in the garage, claiming it was business but speaking in hushed tones that didn't sound professional at all. The way he'd guard his phone like it contained state secrets, taking it with him to the bathroom, keeping it face down during dinner, immediately closing apps when I walked into the room. But the biggest red flag, the one I should have paid attention to months ago, was how he'd changed toward me. Not dramatically. Marcus was too smart for obvious cruelty. It was subtle. The way he'd started criticizing little things about my appearance, my cooking, my boring job. How he'd stopped initiating physical intimacy and seemed relieved when I was too tired from 12-hour shifts to pursue it myself. The way he'd begun treating our conversations like interruptions rather than connections. I told myself it was stress. His business was expanding rapidly, and he was working on several major developments simultaneously. The pressure was immense, and I understood that. I'd been supporting him through the challenges, picking up extra shifts at the hospital to help with our finances, managing all the household responsibilities so he could focus on work, being the understanding wife who didn't complain when date. Nights disappeared and family time became non-existent. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed during what should have been a routine moment of domestic bliss. I was doing laundry, specifically washing Marcus's work shirts, when I found something that made my blood run cold. Not lipstick this time. Not a suspicious receipt or a strange phone number. It was a small piece of paper that had fallen out of his jacket pocket, the kind of paper you get from those expensive boutique hotels that cater to business travelers who want to impress their companions. It was a note, written in distinctly feminine handwriting. "Thank you for the most incredible weekend. I can't wait until this is all over and we can finally be together openly. All my love, V.V." A single letter that shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. That's when I realized that my attention to detail, my ability to notice when something was wrong, hadn't failed me at all. I'd been seeing the signs for months. I'd just been too afraid to acknowledge what they meant. The woman who would walk into my dining room with such confidence had a name that started with V, and she believed she was going to win. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. That note changed everything, but it didn't change me overnight. For 3 days after finding it, I carried on as if nothing had happened. I made Marcus his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup. I ironed his shirts with the same careful attention I'd always given them. I kissed him goodbye each morning and welcomed him home each evening with the same warmth I'd maintained for 9 years of marriage. But inside, I was dying a slow, methodical death. See, I'm not the type of woman who falls apart dramatically. I don't throw dishes or scream accusations or collapse into hysterical tears. That's not who Isabella Cortez is, and it's certainly not who I was raised to be. My mother, Carmen Cortez, emigrated from Guadalajara when she was 19, worked 3 jobs to put herself through nursing school, and raised 2 daughters as a single parent after my father decided family life wasn't for him. She taught me that strength isn't about making noise. It's about enduring, adapting, and ultimately prevailing. "Mija," she used to say when I'd come home from school upset about some teenage drama. "Smart women don't react immediately. They observe, they plan, and then they act with precision." Those words had guided me through nursing school at Riverside, community college, through the grueling 12-hour shifts as a new graduate, through the heartbreak of 3 miscarriages that had left Marcus and me emotionally devastated and our marriage strained in ways we'd never fully addressed. I'd learned to compartmentalize pain, to function through crisis, to maintain my composure when everything around me was falling apart. Which is exactly what I did for those 3 days while that note burned like acid in my memory. Our life in Willowbrook had been everything Marcus and I had dreamed of when we were young and broke, and so desperately in love that we couldn't imagine ever wanting anything more than each other. The neighborhood was the kind of place where children rode bikes on tree-lined streets, where neighbors knew each other's names and watched each other's houses during vacations, where the biggest drama was usually the annual homeowners association, meeting debates about lawn maintenance standards. Our house at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive was a colonial-style home with cream-colored siding and hunter green shutters. I'd spent weekends painting the front porch swing that overlooked our carefully maintained garden, where I grew tomatoes and herbs that I used in the elaborate dinners I'd cook for Marcus's business associates. The dining room where this story would reach its climax was my pride and joy. A formal space with a mahogany table that could seat 12, walls painted in warm gold that made everyone look beautiful in the soft lighting from the crystal chandelier we'd saved for 6 months to afford. I'd hosted dozens of dinner parties in that room over the years, business associates celebrating major deals, family gatherings for holidays and birthdays, intimate dinners for the small circle of friends we'd maintained since college. I was known for my attention to detail, the perfectly coordinated table, settings, the seasonal centerpieces, the way I could remember everyone's dietary restrictions and favorite wines. Marcus would always introduce me as the woman who makes everything perfect, and I'd believed that was a compliment. I'd believed that my role as the supportive wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who made his life run smoothly, was valuable and appreciated. I'd believed that while he was building his career and chasing his ambitions, I was building our foundation, creating a home worth coming back to, a life worth living, a partnership worth preserving. But now I understood that while I'd been perfecting our life, he'd been building another one entirely. Marcus's real estate development company, Cortez and Associates, had grown exponentially over the past 3 years. What had started as a small operation focusing on residential properties had expanded into major commercial developments throughout the Tri-County area. He was constantly traveling to potential sites, meeting with investors, negotiating with city planners and construction crews, or so he told me. The success had changed him, though I'd been slow to recognize it. The Marcus I'd fallen in love with at Northridge University had been ambitious but grounded, driven but not ruthless, confident but not arrogant. He'd been the kind of man who remembered to call his mother every Sunday, who would stop everything to help a friend move, who would spend entire weekends working on our house not because he had to, but because he loved creating something beautiful, with his hands. Somewhere along the way, that man had been replaced by someone who measured his worth by the size of his deals, the cost of his watch, the exclusivity of his social circle. He'd started wearing custom suits instead of off the rack, driving a BMW instead of his reliable Honda, talking about networking opportunities and strategic partnerships instead of friendships and genuine connections. I'd told myself this was natural, even admirable. Success required sacrifice, and if Marcus was becoming more sophisticated, more polished, more impressive, wasn't that something to celebrate? Wasn't I supposed to be proud that my husband was achieving everything we'd dreamed of? But I'd failed to notice that as Marcus had risen in his professional world, I'd gradually disappeared from it. The business dinners that had once included spouses became guys' nights out. The company parties where I'd once been welcomed as part of the team became exclusive events where wives would only complicate the dynamics. The weekend conferences that had once been opportunities for mini vacations together became solo trips where my presence would be distracting. I'd accepted all of this because I trusted him, because I believed in us, because after 12 years, together and 9 years of marriage, I thought I knew who Marcus Cortez was at his core. The note signed V proved how completely wrong I'd been. That night, I did what I do best when faced with a problem I can't immediately solve. I gathered information while Marcus slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware that his carefully constructed double life was about to be dissected with surgical precision. I sat in our home office with my laptop and began the most important research project of my life. The letter V was my only clue, but in the digital age, that was more than enough for someone with my methodical approach to problem solving. I started with Marcus's social media accounts, though he'd always been relatively private online. His Facebook was mostly business-related posts and the occasional photo of us at company events. His LinkedIn showed his professional network, but nothing obviously personal. Instagram was where things got interesting. Marcus rarely posted, but he was tagged in photos by colleagues and business associates. I scrolled through months of images, looking for any woman whose name began with V. There were dozens of faces, but one kept appearing with increasing frequency over the past year. A stunning brunette with sharp cheekbones and an infectious smile who seemed to show up at every major company event, Vanessa Sterling. Her Instagram profile was public, which turned out to be a crucial mistake on her part. The bio read, Interior Designer, Riverside County, creating beautiful spaces for extraordinary people, wife to the amazing David Sterling, wife. She was married. My hands trembled slightly as I clicked through her posts. The woman was undeniably gorgeous, the kind of effortless beauty that made other women simultaneously admire and resent her. Long, dark hair that fell in perfect waves, emerald green eyes that seemed to sparkle even in casual photos, a figure that looked stunning in everything from business attire to weekend casual wear. But it wasn't her appearance that made my stomach clench with recognition. It was the locations. 3 months ago, she'd posted a photo of herself at Celestial Rooftop Bar downtown with the caption, "Best cocktails in the city. Perfect end to a successful business meeting." The timestamp was 8:47 p.m. on a Thursday. I knew that timestamp because it was the night Marcus had come home at nearly midnight, claiming he'd been stuck in traffic after a client dinner that had run late. 6 weeks ago, she'd shared a picture of herself at Grandview Resort, about 2 hours outside the city. The caption read, "Sometimes you need to escape the chaos and find your center. Grateful for unexpected adventures." Marcus had been at a weekend conference that same weekend, supposedly in the opposite direction from Grandview Resort. 2 weeks ago, there was a photo of an expensive-looking dinner for two at Romano's, the upscale Italian restaurant across town. 2 wine glasses, 2 plates, candlelight reflecting off silverware. The caption was coy. "When business dinners feel like celebrations, life is full of beautiful surprises." That was the night Marcus had called to say his client meeting was running late and he'd grab something quick on the way home. The evidence was all there, hidden in plain sight on her public social media account. Vanessa Sterling was documenting her affair with my husband for the world to see, confident that I was too trusting, too naive, or too uninterested to notice. I spent the next 4 hours diving deeper into her digital footprint. Her interior design, business Sterling Interiors, was legitimate and successful. She specialized in high-end commercial spaces, exactly the kind of properties Marcus's company developed. Their professional relationship provided perfect cover for their personal one. Her husband, David Sterling, appeared frequently in her earlier posts but had been notably absent from recent ones. He was a tall, distinguished-looking man with graying temples and kind eyes, maybe 10 years older than Vanessa. Their wedding photos from 4 years ago showed a lavish ceremony at the Rosewood Country Club. She'd worn a dress that probably cost more than my car, and they'd looked genuinely happy. But scrolling through the past year of posts, I noticed a pattern. David appeared less and less frequently, while business meetings and work events multiplied. The photos of the two of them together became rare, and when they did appear, something felt forced about Vanessa's smile. I found David's LinkedIn profile and learned he was a senior partner at Morrison, Blake & Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the state. Corporate law, mergers and acquisitions, the kind of high-stakes work that probably kept him traveling frequently and working long hours, just like Marcus's work supposedly kept him busy. The irony was devastating. While David Sterling was probably working late to provide for his wife's luxurious lifestyle, that same wife was having an affair with another woman's husband. While I was home alone, assuming Marcus was building our future, he was actually destroying it with a woman whose own husband was equally oblivious to the betrayal happening under his nose. I needed more concrete evidence, though. Social media. Posts and suspicious timing weren't enough to confront Marcus or make any serious decisions about our marriage. I needed proof that couldn't be explained away by coincidence or professional necessity. That's when I remembered Marcus's home office. He'd always been possessive of that space, claiming he needed privacy for confidential business calls and sensitive financial documents. I'd respected that boundary for years, never entering without permission, never questioning why he kept it locked when he wasn't home. But at 4 a.m, with my husband sleeping soundly upstairs and my marriage hanging in the balance, respecting boundaries seemed less important than discovering the truth. The office door was locked, as always, but I knew where Marcus kept the spare key, inside the fake book on the hallway bookshelf. He'd thought he was being clever, but after 9 years of marriage, I knew all his hiding places. The office was meticulously organized, just like everything else in Marcus's life. His desk was clear except for his desktop computer, a few business cards, and a photo of us from our honeymoon in Santorini. The sight of that photo, our younger selves, so obviously in love, so certain of our future together, nearly broke my resolve. But I pressed on. His computer was password protected, but I knew Marcus well enough to guess correctly on the third try, the date we'd bought our house, which he'd always called the beginning of our real life together. Another cruel irony. His email revealed nothing obvious. Marcus was too smart to leave a digital trail in his primary accounts. But his browser history told a different story. Searches for jewelry stores, upscale hotels, weekend getaway destinations. Recent visits to websites for florists, spa packages, and romantic restaurants. None of these things had made their way into our marriage. In his desk drawers, hidden beneath insurance papers and business contracts, I found receipts that painted a devastating picture. Hotel charges for nights he'd supposedly been at home. Restaurant bills for meals he'd never shared with me. Jewelry, store receipts for items I'd never seen. And then, in a manila folder labeled business contacts, I found photographs. Printed photos, hidden like a teenager's secret stash. Marcus and Vanessa at various locations, clearly intimate, clearly involved. Clearly in love in a way that made my chest feel hollow. The final photo in the stack was the most damaging. Vanessa wearing what was obviously an engagement ring on her right hand, not her wedding ring finger, but a clear symbol of Marcus's promise for their future together. Her face was radiant with joy, and Marcus was looking at her like she was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. I'd never seen him look at me that way. Not even on our wedding day. As dawn broke through the office windows, I sat surrounded by the evidence of my husband's betrayal, feeling strangely calm. The investigation phase was complete. Now it was time to plan my response, and I knew exactly how this was going to end. The photographs changed everything, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of crumbling into despair or exploding into rage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. For the first time since finding that note, I knew exactly what I needed to do. But this wasn't going to be a simple confrontation or a straightforward divorce. Marcus had spent months, maybe years, carefully orchestrating his deception. He'd played chess while I'd been playing checkers, thinking several moves ahead while I'd trusted in the basic rules of marriage and fidelity. Now it was my turn to think strategically. I spent the weekend in what I can only describe as reconnaissance mode. While Marcus was supposedly at his office, catching up on paperwork, though I now suspected he was with Vanessa, I began the most important project of my life, planning the perfect revelation. The dinner party idea came to me on Sunday evening as I was meal planning for the week. Marcus had mentioned that his business partner, Tony Valdez, would be in town the following weekend with his wife Maria. We'd hosted them several times before, and they always brought their college-aged daughter Sophia when she was home from Northwestern University. We should have them over for dinner, I suggested casually, as Marcus scrolled through his phone at the breakfast table. It's been months since we've seen them properly. Marcus looked up, slightly startled. This weekend? I don't know, babe. I might have some client obligations. Client obligations on a Saturday night? I kept my voice light, curious rather than suspicious. That seems unusual. It's a big project, he said quickly. These investors keep irregular schedules. I nodded, sympathetically. Well, Tony mentioned he's only in town for one night. It would be rude not to invite them over, don't you think? Especially since they've had us to their place in Chicago so many times. I could see the wheels turning in Marcus's head. Tony Valdez wasn't just his business partner. He was his mentor, the man who'd given Marcus his first major opportunity in commercial real estate. Refusing to host him would be professionally damaging and personally insulting. "You're right," Marcus said finally. "Let me check my schedule and get back to you." What he didn't know was that I'd already spoken to Tony that morning. Not about the dinner, not yet, but about something entirely different. I'd called him under the pretense of wanting to surprise Marcus with something special for their upcoming project completion. During that conversation, I'd learned something fascinating. Tony had never heard of Vanessa Sterling or Sterling Interiors. Despite Marcus's claims that she was a crucial part of their design team for major projects, Tony had no knowledge of her involvement in any of their developments, which meant Marcus had been lying about the professional aspect of their relationship too. But my conversation with Tony had given me an even better idea. During our chat, he'd mentioned that his brother-in-law was visiting from Denver, a successful businessman named David something or other who was interested in potential investment opportunities in our area. David Sterling. The pieces fell into place with almost supernatural precision. I ended my call with Tony and immediately began researching David Sterling's connection to the Valdez family. It took some digging through LinkedIn and Facebook networks, but eventually I found it. Maria Valdez's sister had married David Sterling 3 years ago in a small ceremony in Denver. They'd moved to our area when David's law firm opened a satellite office here, which meant David Sterling was Tony's brother-in-law, which meant if I played this correctly, I could engineer a situation where both betrayed spouses would discover their partner's affair simultaneously, in front of witnesses who could ensure there would be consequences beyond just personal ones. The plan that formed in my mind was intricate and satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. It would require careful timing, strategic invitations, and precise orchestration of events. But if I could pull it off, it would be justice served with the kind of poetic precision that would make my mother proud. I spent Monday and Tuesday gathering intelligence and making preliminary arrangements. I learned David Sterling's work schedule through some casual social media stalking and discovered he typically worked late on Fridays, but kept weekends free for family time. Perfect for a Saturday dinner invitation. I also did something I'd never done before in 9 years of marriage. I hired a private investigator. Elena Rodriguez came highly recommended from a nurse colleague who'd used her services during her own divorce proceedings. Elena was a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial investigations, and she had the kind of direct, no-nonsense approach that immediately put me at ease. "I need documentation," I told her during our meeting at a coffee shop across town. "Photos, timelines, evidence that will hold up in court if necessary." Elena reviewed the evidence I'd already gathered and nodded approvingly. "You've done excellent preliminary work. Most people come to me with just suspicions and hurt feelings. You've got a solid foundation here. How long do you think it will take to get what I need? For this level of documentation? 2 weeks, maybe? 3. They're not being particularly careful, which makes my job easier." Elena paused, studying my face. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once I provide you with irrefutable proof, there's no going back to willful ignorance." "There's no going back anyway," I said quietly. "I just want to control how the truth comes out." While Elena began her surveillance work, I focused on the social engineering aspect of my plan. I called Tony Valdez back and formally invited him and Maria for dinner on Saturday evening. "Actually," I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, "didn't you mention your brother-in-law was in town? David something? You should bring him along. Marcus loves meeting potential investors, and I always enjoy cooking for a crowd." Tony was enthusiastic about the idea. "David Sterling, he's actually been asking about opportunities in commercial real estate. This could be perfect timing." "Wonderful," I said, my heart racing with anticipation. "What about his wife? I'd love to meet her." "Vanessa? I'm not sure she'll be available. She's got some kind of work thing this weekend, I think. But I'll ask." "Work thing?" Of course she did. "Well, bring David either way." "And Tony?" Let's keep this casual. No need to mention the other guests to David ahead of time. I want it to be a nice surprise. The final piece of my plan involved Marcus himself, and it required the performance of my lifetime. I needed him to believe that Saturday's dinner was his idea, or at least something he was enthusiastic about. I started planting seeds on Wednesday evening. You know, I was thinking about what you said regarding networking and building relationships, I said as we ate dinner. I realized I don't do enough to support your business social life. Marcus looked surprised. What do you mean? I mean, I should be more involved in entertaining your colleagues and potential clients, like successful wives do. Maybe we should host more dinner parties. Invite people who could be valuable connections for you. I could see this appealing to his ego and his practical nature simultaneously. That's actually a great idea. Who were you thinking of inviting? Well, Tony and Maria are coming Saturday, and I suggested they bring Tony's brother-in-law, David. Apparently, he's looking for investment opportunities. I paused, pretending to consider. Maybe you could invite someone from your side too? Someone you've been wanting to impress or get closer to professionally? Marcus's face went slightly pale. I don't know. Saturday's pretty last minute. Come on, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. This is exactly the kind of thing that separates successful people from average ones. The willingness to seize opportunities. I smiled warmly. Besides, I want to show off my husband. Let people see what a power couple we are. That night, I heard Marcus making phone calls in his office. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent, almost pleading. When he came to bed, he seemed agitated. Everything okay? I asked innocently. Fine, he said quickly. Just work stuff. On Thursday, Elena called with an update. I've got video of them entering the Grandview Resort together yesterday afternoon, she said. Should have the complete package ready for you by Friday evening. Friday morning, Marcus announced he'd invited a colleague to join us for dinner. Great, I said brightly. Anyone I know? Vanessa Sterling. She's an interior designer we work with sometimes. I thought she might be a good connection for David, since he's interested in commercial real estate. Perfect, I replied, though my heart was hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. What's she like? Professional, Marcus said carefully. Very talented. You'll like her. As Friday evening approached and Elena delivered the final evidence package, photographs, hotel records, financial documentation that painted an undeniable picture of the affair, I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. Tomorrow night, Marcus and Vanessa would walk into my dining room believing they were in control of their narrative, confident in their ability to maintain their deception even in the same room as Vanessa's unsuspecting husband. They had no idea that they were walking into the most carefully orchestrated revelation of infidelity in Cedar Falls history. The stage was set. The players were in position. All that remained was the performance. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made everything feel sharp and defined. I woke up before my alarm, my body humming with nervous energy that felt more like anticipation than anxiety. Today was the day everything would change, and for the first time in months, I was the one controlling the narrative. Marcus was unusually attentive, bringing me coffee in bed and asking multiple times if I needed help with dinner preparations. His nervous energy was palpable, though he was trying hard to mask it behind forced casualness. You seem stressed about tonight, I observed as he checked his phone for the 15th time before noon. Not stressed, he said quickly. Just want everything to go well. Tony's opinion matters a lot for the business. And Vanessa's? I asked innocently, watching his reaction carefully. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She's just a colleague, Bella, but first impressions matter in business. Of course, I agreed smoothly. I'm sure she's lovely. Any dietary restrictions I should know about? Marcus shook his head. but I caught him texting someone immediately after our conversation, undoubtedly warning Vanessa about what to expect, coaching her on how to behave around his unsuspecting wife. I spent the morning in methodical preparation, treating the day like a surgical procedure that required precise timing and flawless execution. The dining room was arranged with mathematical precision, 8 place settings around our mahogany table, with carefully planned seating that would maximize the dramatic impact of the evening's revelations. I'd positioned David Sterling directly, across from where Vanessa would sit, ensuring he'd have a clear view of her reactions throughout the evening. Marcus would be at the head of the table, with Vanessa to his right, close enough that their body language would be obvious to anyone paying attention, but not so obvious as to raise immediate suspicions. The menu was designed to require minimal, last-minute attention, allowing me to focus completely on orchestrating the social dynamics. Herb-crusted lamb with rosemary potatoes, autumn vegetable medley, and pear tart for dessert. Wine pairings that would encourage conversation and lower inhibitions slightly, but not enough to excuse anyone's behavior. Elena Rodriguez had delivered the final evidence package the night before, a comprehensive folder containing photographs, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and a detailed timeline of Marcus and Vanessa's affair spanning the past 14 months. The documentation was thorough enough to satisfy any divorce attorney and damning enough to destroy both their personal and professional reputations. But the evidence folder wasn't for tonight. Tonight was about something far more satisfying than legal documentation. At 3 o'clock, I did something I'd never done in 9 years of marriage. I went to the salon for a complete transformation. The stylist, a chatty woman named Carmen who seemed to understand exactly what I needed without being told, gave me a sleek bob that framed my face perfectly and highlighted the cheekbones I'd forgotten I had. "You look like a woman with a mission," Carmen said as she applied subtle but dramatic makeup that made my brown eyes look almost smoky. "Special occasion?" "You could say that," I replied, studying my reflection. The woman looking back at me was confident, powerful, and absolutely ready for battle. "It's going to be a night to remember." By 5 o'clock, I was dressed in a midnight, blue wrap dress that I'd bought specifically for this evening. Elegant enough for a dinner party, but with a subtle edge that made me feel armored for what was coming. The dress fit perfectly, and paired with heels that added 3 inches to my height, I looked like someone who commanded respect and attention. Marcus did a double take when he saw me. "Wow, you look different." "Good different?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from his expression. "Amazing different," he said, but there was something uncertain in his voice, as if my transformation had shifted the dynamic in ways he couldn't quite identify. The first guests arrived at 6:30 sharp. Tony and Maria Valdez came through, the door with their characteristic warmth, Maria immediately complimenting the autumn decorations I'd arranged throughout the house. "Isabella, you've outdone yourself," Tony said, embracing me with genuine affection. "This place looks incredible." "Thank you," I replied, accepting a bottle of expensive wine from Maria. "I wanted everything to be perfect tonight." David Sterling arrived 15 minutes later, and I understood immediately why Vanessa had been attracted to him initially. He was distinguished in a way that spoke of success and stability. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of confident bearing that came from years of handling high-stakes legal negotiations. "You must be Isabella," he said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Tony's told me wonderful things about you and Marcus. Thank you for including me tonight." "The pleasure is entirely mine," I said, meaning it more than he could possibly know. Marcus is always eager to meet potential investors, and I love having the opportunity to entertain. As I served appetizers and wine, I watched David carefully. He was charming and engaging, asking thoughtful questions about the neighborhood and our renovations, sharing stories about his move from Denver. There was no indication that he suspected his wife of anything beyond working late on business projects. Marcus was visibly on edge, checking his phone constantly and starting slightly every time the doorbell rang. When it finally chimed at 7:15, his entire body tensed. "That must be Vanessa," he announced unnecessarily, moving toward the door with obvious anxiety. I followed, curious to see how they'd handle their first interaction in front of me. Through the front window, I could see a sleek black BMW in our driveway. Expensive, sophisticated, exactly what I'd expected from someone conducting an affair with my husband. Marcus opened the door, and Vanessa Sterling stepped into my foyer, with the kind of confidence that made my teeth ache. She was even more stunning in person than in her Instagram photos, tall and elegant in a perfectly tailored emerald green dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her dark hair, styled in loose waves that caught the light beautifully. "You must be Isabella," she said, extending a manicured hand with a smile that was both warm and predatory. "I've heard so much about you." The audacity was breathtaking. Here was the woman who'd been sleeping with my husband for over a year, standing in my entryway, complimenting my home while wearing jewelry that my husband had probably purchased for her. "Vanessa," I replied, accepting her handshake with my own practiced smile. "The pleasure is all mine. Marcus speaks of you so highly." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, that Marcus had mentioned her at all. But she recovered, quickly, following me into the living room where the other guests were gathered. The introductions were fascinating to watch. Tony and Maria greeted Vanessa politely, but without particular warmth. Clearly, they'd never met her before, despite Marcus's claims about her involvement in their business projects. But it was David's reaction that made my pulse quicken with anticipation. "Vanessa?" he said, standing up from the sofa with obvious confusion. "What are you doing here?" "David!" Her confident facade cracked slightly, genuine surprise flashing across her features. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Tony invited me," David said slowly, glancing between his wife and Marcus with growing bewilderment. "I thought you had that work project tonight." "I do," Vanessa said quickly, her voice pitched slightly higher than before. "This is the work project. Interior design consultation for Marcus's development company." The lie was smooth and practiced, but I could see the calculation behind her eyes as she tried to figure out how to navigate this unexpected collision of her two worlds. Marcus had gone completely pale, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips, as he watched his carefully controlled double life begin to unravel in real time. "Well, this is wonderful," I said brightly, moving to refill everyone's wine glasses. "What a lovely surprise that you two know each other. David, you didn't mention your wife was in interior design." "She specializes in high-end commercial spaces," David said, still looking confused but beginning to relax slightly. "Though I have to admit, I don't recall her mentioning Marcus's company specifically." "Sterling Interiors," Marcus said quickly, his voice strained. "Vanessa's been invaluable on several projects." I watched the interplay of glances between Marcus and Vanessa, his desperate, hers calculating. They were trying to communicate silently, to coordinate their stories without raising suspicion. But they hadn't prepared for this scenario, and the cracks in their deception were already beginning to show. "How interesting," I mused, refilling Vanessa's wine glass with deliberate precision. "And how convenient that you're both here tonight. David, you'll get to see firsthand how talented your wife is at creating beautiful spaces." The dinner bell chimed in the kitchen, my perfectly timed signal that the meal was ready. As we moved toward the dining room, I caught Vanessa's reflection in the hallway mirror. For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, and I saw raw panic in her green eyes. She had no idea that her panic was just beginning. The dining room felt electric as everyone took their seats, though I was probably the only one who could sense the undercurrents of tension crackling beneath the surface of polite dinner conversation. I'd orchestrated the seating with surgical precision, and watching everyone settle into their assigned places felt like watching the final pieces of a complex puzzle click into position. David sat directly across from Vanessa, just as I'd planned. From his vantage point, he had an unobstructed view of his wife's face and body language. Marcus occupied the head of the table, with Vanessa positioned to his immediate right, close enough that any intimate familiarity between them would be impossible to hide from the other guests. Tony and Maria flanked my end of the table, their warm presence providing the perfect cover of normalcy for what was about to unfold. They were chatting easily about their daughter Sophia's progress at Northwestern, completely oblivious to the psychological warfare about to commence in their honor. I served the first course, a delicate butternut squash soup with toasted pumpkin, seeds, while maintaining the kind of gracious hostess demeanor I'd perfected over years of dinner parties. But tonight, every smile was calculated, every question strategic, every pause deliberately timed for maximum impact. "So, Vanessa," I said as I settled into my own seat, "David was just telling us about your move from Denver. That must have been quite an adjustment, leaving your established client base behind." Vanessa's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "It was challenging initially," she admitted, her voice carefully controlled. "But Marcus's company provided some excellent opportunities to rebuild." "How fortunate," I replied, letting my gaze drift meaningfully between her and my husband. "It's so rare to find business relationships that are both professionally rewarding and personally fulfilling." Marcus coughed slightly, reaching for his wine glass with a hand that wasn't quite steady. "Vanessa's expertise in commercial design has been invaluable," he said, his tone professionally neutral but his body language screaming discomfort. David nodded approvingly. "She's always been passionate about her work. Sometimes I joke that she loves her projects more than she loves coming home." The irony in that statement was so profound that I had to press my lips together to keep from smiling. "How sweet that you're so supportive of her career," I said to David. "Not every husband is comfortable with a wife who works such demanding hours. Late nights and weekend meetings," David continued, completely missing the undercurrents of the conversation. "Especially lately. There have been several projects that required unusual scheduling." "Unusual how?" Tony asked innocently, genuinely curious about the interior design process. Vanessa's face had gone slightly pale, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "Some clients prefer to meet outside traditional business hours, evening consultations, weekend site visits. The hospitality industry operates on different schedules." "The hospitality industry?" Maria inquired. "I thought you specialized in commercial office spaces." For the first time, Vanessa stumbled. "I do. I mean, I work across multiple sectors: hotels, restaurants, office buildings. Diversification is important in design." I watched Marcus shift uncomfortably in his chair. His company exclusively developed office complexes and retail spaces. There wasn't a single hospitality project in their portfolio. Vanessa was improvising now, trying to create believable explanations for meetings that had actually been romantic rendezvous. "That's fascinating," I said, leaning forward with exaggerated interest. "Which hotels have you worked with recently? I'd love to see your hospitality portfolio." The question hit its target perfectly. Vanessa's confident facade cracked visibly, as she realized she'd painted herself into a corner with her improvised explanation. "Well, I can't discuss specific clients due to confidentiality agreements," she said quickly, but her voice had risen slightly in pitch, a tell that David, as an experienced attorney, couldn't help but notice. "Of course," I agreed smoothly. "Professional discretion is so important, though I imagine Marcus can share some details about your collaborative projects, since you work for his company." Marcus looked like a man watching his execution approach, in slow motion. "Actually, most of Vanessa's work with us is still in preliminary stages," he said carefully. "Early planning phases, nothing concrete enough to discuss yet." "How exciting," Tony interjected. "I'd love to hear about these new projects. Are we expanding into hospitality development?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Vanessa, exchanged a look of pure panic as they realized their improvised cover story had created a professional impossibility that Tony, as Marcus's business partner, would immediately recognize as fabrication. "It's more of a research phase," Marcus said weakly. "Exploring potential opportunities." Tony's expression shifted from interest to confusion. "Research phase? Marcus, we just finalized our 5-year strategic plan last month. There was no mention of hospitality ventures." I could practically see the wheels turning in Tony's head as he began to question the legitimacy of Vanessa's supposed business relationship with Marcus. This was even better than I'd hoped. The professional lies were unraveling just as quickly as the personal ones. "Perhaps we should focus on the present rather than future projects," I suggested diplomatically, though internally I was savoring every moment of their growing discomfort. "Vanessa, tell us about your background. How did you and David meet?" It was a perfectly innocent question that served my purposes beautifully. While Vanessa told the story of their courtship, a meet-cute at a charity gala in Denver, a whirlwind romance that led to marriage within 18 months, I watched David's face carefully. He was looking at his wife with genuine affection, completely unaware that the woman he adored was systematically betraying him with another woman's husband. 4 years of marriage next month," David said proudly, raising his wine glass in Vanessa's direction. "Time flies when you're with the right person." 4 years, I repeated thoughtfully. "That means you got married just before moving here. What perfect timing to start fresh in a new city as newlyweds." "Actually, we've only been here about 2.5 years, David corrected. "The first year and a half we stayed in Denver while I wrapped up some major cases." My pulse quickened. According to my research, Vanessa and Marcus's affair had started approximately 14 months ago, which meant it had begun less than a year after she'd moved to our city. She'd barely had time to unpack before she'd started destroying 2 marriages. 2.5 years, I mused, as if doing mental calculations. "So you arrived in early 2022? How did you first connect with Marcus's company, Vanessa? That must have been one of your first professional relationships here." Another direct hit. Vanessa's composure was cracking visibly now, stress sweat beading at her hairline despite the comfortable temperature in the dining room. "Networking," she said vaguely. "Business referrals. The commercial development community is quite small here." "Indeed it is," Tony agreed, but his tone had shifted. As someone who knew every major player in the local commercial development scene, he was clearly struggling to place Vanessa's role in that community. "Which firm did you work with before starting Sterling Interiors?" "I was freelancing," Vanessa said quickly. "Independent contractor work, more flexible for the transition." David looked surprised. "Freelancing? Honey, I thought you said you'd been recruited specifically by a local firm. That's why we moved here so quickly, because of that amazing opportunity you couldn't pass up." The contradiction hung in the air like a toxic cloud. David was staring at his wife with growing confusion, while Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. Even Maria and Tony were beginning to sense that something was seriously wrong with the conversation's undercurrents. "People's memories can be unreliable," I said gently, though my tone carried an edge that made Marcus flinch visibly. "Especially when there are multiple versions of the same story." I stood to clear the soup course, moving around the table with deliberate grace. As I reached for Vanessa's bowl, I leaned in just close enough that only she could hear my whispered words. "Careful, Vanessa. Your stories are starting to contradict each other." When I straightened up, she was staring at me with undisguised shock, her green eyes wide with the first real understanding that this dinner party wasn't the routine social gathering she'd expected. "Is everything all right?" David asked his wife, noticing her sudden pallor. "Fine," she said quickly, but her voice was tight with strain. "Just a slight headache." "Perhaps some fresh air would help," I suggested solicitously. "The patio doors in the living room open onto our garden. It's quite peaceful out there." "No," Vanessa said sharply, then immediately softened her tone. No, thank you. I'm sure it will pass. Marcus was watching this exchange with growing alarm, finally beginning to understand that his carefully controlled evening was spiraling beyond his ability to manage, but he had no idea how much worse things were about to become. As I disappeared into the kitchen to prepare the main course, I could hear the strained conversation continuing in the dining room. David was asking more questions about Vanessa's work. Tony was pressing Marcus for details about projects that didn't exist, and the lies were multiplying faster than either of them could keep track. The main course was ready, herb-crusted, lamb that had been timing perfectly while the social dynamics exploded in the next room. As I arranged the plates with garnishes and sides, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction settling over me. The trap was working flawlessly. Marcus and Vanessa were drowning in their own deceptions. David was beginning to ask the right questions, and the evening's true revelation was still to come. When I returned to the dining room carrying the first plates, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. It was time to escalate from subtle psychological pressure to direct confrontation. The next phase of my plan was about to begin. The main course served as the perfect backdrop for what was about to unfold. As I placed the herb-crusted lamb in front of each guest, I could feel the tension in the room reaching a breaking point. Marcus was barely touching his food, his eyes darting between me and Vanessa like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. Vanessa herself had abandoned all pretense of appetite, her fork moving food around her plate in mechanical patterns while she tried to navigate the increasingly treacherous conversational waters. David, meanwhile, was asking more pointed questions about his wife's work schedule, and I could see the exact moment when his attorney's instincts began to override his trusting husband persona. "You know, Vanessa," David said thoughtfully, cutting into his lamb with precise movements, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about the hospitality projects. Didn't you tell me last month that you were working exclusively on office renovations?" Vanessa's fork clattered against her plate. "Did I? I work on so many different types of projects. It's easy to mix up the details." "Is it?" David's voice remained conversational, but there was steel underneath now. "Because as an attorney, I've learned that inconsistent details usually indicate inconsistent facts." The shift in David's demeanor was palpable. This wasn't a confused husband anymore. This was a skilled legal professional who'd detected deception and was methodically working to expose it. Marcus looked like he might actually vomit. I decided it was time to accelerate the timeline. "David, you mentioned you specialize in corporate law," I said, refilling his wine glass with steady hands. "You must have experience with professional ethics violations. What happens when business relationships cross appropriate boundaries?" "Depends on the specifics," David replied, his attention now fully focused on me rather than his meal. "But generally speaking, undisclosed personal relationships in professional settings can constitute fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and in some cases, grounds for civil liability." "How fascinating," I said, though my tone suggested I found it anything but surprising. "Marcus, you should probably pay attention to this. Given your position as a senior partner, you'd want to ensure all your professional relationships maintain appropriate boundaries." Marcus had gone completely white. "Of course," he managed weakly. "Professional standards are crucial." "Absolutely," I agreed, moving to the sideboard where I'd strategically placed a manila envelope earlier. "In fact, David, you might find this situation interesting from a legal perspective." I returned to the table carrying the envelope, and the sound of my heels on the hardwood floor seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. "What situation?" Tony asked, finally sensing that the evening had taken a decidedly serious turn. "The situation where my husband has been having an affair with David's wife for the past 14 months, I said calmly, opening the envelope and beginning to distribute photocopied documents around the table. "And where they've been using fraudulent business relationships to hide their personal involvement." The explosion of reactions was immediate and devastating. David shot to his feet so quickly his chair toppled backward. "What did you just say?" Vanessa made a sound like a wounded animal. "Isabella, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. "I understand that you've been meeting my husband at the Grandview Resort every Thursday for the past 6 months. I understand that he's spent over $12,000 on jewelry for you that he charged to our joint credit card. I understand that you've been telling your husband you're working late while you're actually in hotel rooms with mine." Marcus tried to stand, but his legs seemed to have failed him. "Bella, please, let me explain." "Explain what, Marcus?" I turned to face him fully, and whatever he saw in my expression made him sink back into his chair. "Explain how you've been lying to me for over a year? Explain how you've been stealing money from our joint accounts to finance your affair? Explain how you've been using your business as a cover story for adultery?" David was staring at the photographs I'd distributed, his face cycling through shock, rage, and devastation in rapid succession. "These are real," he said flatly, holding up a photo of Marcus and Vanessa kissing outside a restaurant. "These are actually real." "Very real," I confirmed, taken by a private investigator over the past 2 weeks, though I have evidence going back much further than that. Tony and Maria sat frozen, their dinner forgotten as they tried to process what was happening at their table. Maria's hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror at the scene unfolding before her. Vanessa finally found her voice, though it came out as a broken whisper. "David, I can explain. It's not what it looks like." "It's not what it looks like?" David's voice rose to nearly a shout. "It looks like my wife is having an affair. It looks like she's been lying to me for over a year. What exactly should it look like?" "We fell in love," Vanessa said desperately, tears streaming down her face. "We didn't mean for it to happen, but we fell in love." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus buried his face in his hands, finally understanding that there was no possible way to salvage this situation. "You fell in love," David repeated, his voice deadly quiet now. "You fell in love with a married man and decided that gave you the right to destroy 2 marriages. David, please, don't." The single word carried such finality that Vanessa immediately fell silent. "Don't say another word to me. Not now. Not ever." Tony cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps Maria and I should leave," he said quietly. "This seems like a private matter." "No," I said firmly. "Please stay. There are professional implications here that you need to understand." I turned to Marcus, who was still hiding behind his hands like a child who believed invisibility was possible through willpower alone. "Marcus," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned from years of managing crisis situations in pediatric nursing. "Look at me." When he finally raised his head, his eyes were red and filled with tears I didn't believe for a second. "Tony deserves to know that you've been using company resources to facilitate your affair," I continued relentlessly. "Company credit cards for hotel rooms, company time for personal meetings, company reputation to provide cover stories for adultery." Tony's face hardened as the business implications became clear. "Is this true, Marcus?" "I can pay back any money," Marcus started weakly. "It's not about the money," Tony interrupted, his voice cutting. "It's about integrity. It's about the fact that you've been representing our company while engaged in fraudulent behavior. Do you have any idea what this could do to our reputation? To our client relationships? I never meant for it to affect the business. But it has affected the business," I said, pulling out another set of documents. "Because Vanessa isn't just your mistress, Marcus. She's also been embezzling from her own design clients to fund your relationship." This revelation hit like a physical blow. David staggered backward, reaching for his chair for support. "That's not true," Vanessa gasped. "I would never—" "Sterling Interiors has been billing clients for materials that were never purchased and services that were never provided," I continued, reading from Elena's investigation report. The money has been going into a separate account that funded your trips, your gifts, your entire fantasy relationship. David's legal mind immediately grasped the implications. Vanessa, tell me you didn't embezzle client funds. Her silence was answer enough. Jesus Christ, David whispered, sinking back into his chair. You didn't just cheat on me. You committed felonies. The room fell silent except for the sound of Vanessa's sobbing and Marcus's labored breathing. Tony and Maria sat like statues, processing the complete destruction of everything they'd thought they knew about the people around them. There's one more thing, I said quietly, reaching for the final document in my envelope. David, I thought you should know that your wife has been planning to leave you. She and Marcus have been looking at apartments together for the past 2 months. I placed the real estate listings in front of David, each one marked with notes, in Marcus's handwriting about neighborhoods and amenities. They've been building a life together. I continued relentlessly, using money stolen from both our marriages, time stolen from our relationships, and lies that have poisoned everything we thought we could trust. David stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled in a way that suggested he was fighting, to maintain his composure through sheer force of will. Vanessa, he said quietly, you have exactly 10 minutes to gather whatever you need from our house. After that, the locks will be changed and you'll be communicating with me exclusively through attorneys. David, please. 10 minutes, he repeated. Then he turned to me. Isabella, I'm profoundly sorry that my wife has caused you this pain. If there's anything I can do to help with divorce proceedings or legal actions, please don't hesitate to contact me. He pulled out his business card and placed it beside my plate, then walked out of my dining room with the dignified bearing of a man who refused to let devastating betrayal destroy his fundamental character. The sound of the front door closing behind him seemed to break whatever spell had been holding the rest of us frozen. Marcus finally stood, swaying slightly as if the ground beneath him was unstable. Bella, we need to talk, he said desperately. I know this looks bad, but you don't understand the whole situation. I looked at my husband of 9 years, this man I'd loved and trusted and built a life with, and felt absolutely nothing. The only thing I don't understand, Marcus, is how I ever convinced myself you were worth 9 years of my life. 3 months have passed since that dinner party, and I'm sitting in my new apartment on the 15th floor of the Riverside Towers, watching the sunset paint the city in shades of gold and crimson. The view from here is spectacular. I can see the entire downtown district, the river that gives our city its name, and the rolling hills beyond that stretch toward the horizon like a promise of endless possibilities. This apartment is nothing, like the house Marcus and I shared in Willowbrook. It's smaller, certainly, but it's entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every decorative choice, every single decision about how to arrange my life has been made by me, for me, without having to consider anyone else's preferences or opinions. The freedom of that is still intoxicating. The aftermath of that Saturday night was swift and brutal, like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Within hours of David Sterling's departure, word had spread through the interconnected networks of our professional and social circles. Cedar Falls might be a decent-sized city, but the upper-middle-class professional community is surprisingly small, and scandals of this magnitude don't stay contained for long. Marcus's business relationship with Tony Valdez ended within a week. Tony was professional about it. He didn't fire Marcus outright, but he made it clear that their partnership was untenable given the circumstances. Marcus had violated too many fundamental principles of business ethics and personal integrity for their relationship to continue. The company they'd built together was quietly restructured, with Marcus buying out of his share at a significant loss, and Tony taking sole control of operations. The professional consequences for Marcus extended far beyond his partnership with Tony. Word of his affair and misuse of company resources spread through the commercial real estate community like wildfire. Several major clients terminated their contracts, citing concerns about professional standards and ethical conduct. His reputation, which he'd spent years carefully cultivating, was destroyed in a matter of weeks. Vanessa's downfall was even more spectacular. David Sterling, true to his word, had changed the locks on their house within hours and immediately filed for both divorce and criminal charges related to her embezzlement. His legal connections meant that law enforcement took the financial crime seriously, and within 2 weeks, Sterling Interiors was under investigation by both state authorities and the IRS. The embezzlement charges were more extensive than even I had realized. Elena Rodriguez's investigation had only scratched the surface of Vanessa's financial crimes. Over the course of 18 months, she had systematically stolen nearly $80,000 from various clients, using sophisticated billing schemes and forged documentation to hide her theft. The money had funded not just her affair with Marcus, but an increasingly expensive lifestyle that her legitimate income couldn't support. She was arrested on a Tuesday morning as she tried to access the safety deposit box where she'd been hiding cash and jewelry purchased with stolen funds. The local newspaper ran the story on the front page, complete with her mugshot and a detailed breakdown of the charges against her. By Wednesday, she had become the most notorious white-collar criminal in Cedar Falls history. David Sterling handled his own devastation with the kind of professional grace that made me understand why Vanessa had been attracted to him in the first place. He reached out to me during the second week after our dinner party, not seeking emotional support or shared commiseration, but offering practical assistance with divorce proceedings and legal strategies. "I've been thinking about what you accomplished that night," he said during our coffee meeting at a neutral location downtown. "The way you orchestrated the revelation, gathered evidence, controlled the narrative. It was masterful." "It was necessary," I replied simply. "Sometimes people need to see the truth presented in a way they can't ignore or explain away." "Still," David continued, "most people in your situation would have confronted privately, gotten emotional, made it messy. You turned it into a precision operation that ensured maximum accountability for everyone involved." He was right, though I hadn't fully recognized it myself until he pointed it out. The dinner party hadn't been about revenge exactly, though there had certainly been satisfying elements of justice served. It had been about controlling how the truth emerged, ensuring that both betrayed spouses learned everything simultaneously, and creating a situation where Marcus and Vanessa couldn't manipulate the narrative or control the damage. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly straightforward, largely because Marcus was in no position to fight for anything. His assets had been significantly diminished by the business losses and legal fees, and Elena's evidence package made any attempt to hide financial information pointless. I kept the house initially, though I sold it 2 months later and used the proceeds to purchase this apartment and establish financial independence that didn't depend on anyone else's choices or reliability. My career at Westfield Children's Hospital flourished in ways I hadn't expected. The confidence I'd gained from successfully navigating the crisis of my marriage translated into enhanced leadership skills at work. Dr. Patricia Chen, the department head, noticed the change immediately and began assigning me increasingly complex cases and administrative responsibilities. "You seem different since your divorce," she observed during my performance review. "More decisive, more willing to take charge in difficult situations. Whatever you've been through has made you a stronger nurse and a better colleague." She was offering me a promotion to charge nurse, a position that would involve supervising other staff and coordinating patient care across multiple units. It was exactly the kind of career advancement I'd been hoping for, but had been too afraid to pursue while my personal life was in chaos. I accepted immediately. The social aftermath was more complex but ultimately liberating. Some of our mutual friends disappeared entirely, uncomfortable with the messiness of choosing sides or simply unable to handle the dramatic collapse of what they'd perceived as a stable marriage. Others rallied around me with support I hadn't expected, particularly the women who admitted they'd had their own suspicions about Marcus's behavior, but hadn't known how to approach me about them. Maria Valdez became an unexpected ally and friend. She reached out a week after the dinner party to check on my well-being and ended up becoming one of my closest confidants. Her perspective as someone who'd witnessed the entire revelation firsthand was invaluable in helping me process what had happened and move forward constructively. "What you did took incredible courage," she told me during one of our regular lunch meetings. "Most people would have been too afraid of the confrontation, too worried about making a scene. You faced the truth head-on and demanded that everyone else do the same." My relationship with my family deepened as well. My mother, Carmen, flew in from Phoenix the week after everything happened and stayed for 10 days, helping me navigate the practical aspects of disentangling my life from Marcus's, while providing the kind of unconditional emotional support that only mothers can offer. "Mija," she said as we sorted through boxes of belongings in the Willowbrook house, "I'm proud of how you handled this. You didn't let them make you into a victim. You took control and demanded justice." As for Marcus himself, our final interaction came 6 weeks after the dinner party, during the legal proceedings to finalize our divorce. He looked diminished somehow, as if the collapse of his carefully constructed image had left him physically smaller. His expensive clothes couldn't disguise the fact that he'd lost weight and gained lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant stress. "I want you to know I never meant for any of this to happen," he said quietly as we waited, outside the attorney's office. "I never meant to hurt you. I studied the man I'd been married to for 9 years, this person I'd once believed I knew completely, and realized I felt nothing but a mild curiosity about how he'd justify his choices to himself." "I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Marcus," I replied calmly. "You just didn't care whether you hurt me or not. There's a difference." He tried to respond, but I'd already turned away. There was nothing left to say between us, nothing left to resolve or forgive or explain. He'd made his choices, I'd made mine, and we were both living with the consequences. Now, as I sit in my beautiful apartment watching the sun set over the city, I'm learning to call home in an entirely new way. I think about how profoundly my life has changed. I'm no longer the woman who built her identity around being the perfect wife, the supportive partner, the foundation that allowed someone else to shine. I'm Isabella Cortez, charge nurse, homeowner, independent woman, who proved she could not only survive betrayal, but emerge stronger from it. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found that note signed V, if I'd continued living in willful ignorance of Marcus's affair. But those thoughts never last long, because I know with absolute certainty that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Tomorrow is my birthday, my 33rd, and I'm celebrating it the way I want to. Dinner with Maria and David Sterling, who have become genuine friends through our shared experience of public betrayal and private recovery. We've formed an unlikely but solid support network. 3 people who learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you leads directly to the best thing that can happen to you. The woman who walked into my dining room 3 months ago, with such confidence, believed she was in control of the narrative. She thought she understood the game being played and her role in it. She had no idea that the real game had already begun, that the rules had been written by someone who'd spent months preparing for exactly that moment. Justice, I've learned, isn't always swift, but when it's properly orchestrated, it can be absolutely perfect. Coming up next, you'll see 2 more stories we handpicked just for you. If this one struck a chord, you're going to love what's next. Tap to keep the journey going.